Okay, good. So, Shana Tova to everyone. We were discussing Yehuda Levi's presentation of the philosopher, and it has two parts. One has to do with his metaphysical, theological point of view, which we discussed last time. And the other, which we're going to enter now, is the philosophical conception of the proper human life. Because philosophy, as I said, for Jewish thinkers, presented a challenge not only in its metaphysical perception about God, about Hashgacha, about Bria, about all those issues, but it also was a vision of what is a worthy human life, a proper human life. And in what way, by the way, the religious ideals coming from Midrash and Gemara of human perfection how do they stand before philosophical conceptions? One issue, for example, if you look at Shmona Prakim as a text of Rambam, maybe when we're going to discuss haKuzari, he has a very beautiful section on the Chassid. But if you look at the Shmona Prakim, you see that Maimonides Rambam is struggling what's the relationship between the wise men, we might say, in Chassidut, right? One feature of the Chassid, if we want to say, Chassidut, usually we perceive Chassidut as a radical form of life. Unlike everyone, unlike the tzaddik, the chassid always acts in a radical fashion. He is always, I would say, checking the borders of the protocol in the name of intimacy, if I want to give a definition of chassidus. But the idea of radical of radical behavior stands, for example, in tension with Derech HaEmtza, with this idea of the Derech HaZahav. How do you equate the Chassid and the Chacham? As a general question. So for example, one major issue was Anava, because Aristotle, in his ethics, has a sustained attack on the value of humility. He thinks it's a vice, not a virtue. So there are different elements of what it is to have a full, worthy human life that engage the philosophical tradition. And here we're moving to that conception of what is the philosopher's idea of worthy human life. Okay. Now, we said that Halevi thinks that not all humans are equal vis-a-vis their natural capacity for maintaining perfection, achieving perfection. We discussed that issue. We also discussed towards the end different conceptions of elitism, or what is the Hamon, what are the masses, the multitude. And so we are in page Gimel at the beginning. והאדם השלם, the perfect human being, ידבק בו מעין אור אלוהי הנקרא בשם השכל הפועל, בו יתחבר השכל הנפעל של האדם התחברות של התמזגות, עד אשר יראה האדם ההוא את עצמו כאילו הוא השכל הפועל, אין ביניהם כל הפרש. אותה השעה יגידו כליו, רצוני לומר איבריו של האיש ההוא למדרגה, שבה יעשו רק את המעשים השלמים ביותר, בזמנים הנכונים ביותר, בדרכים הטובות ביותר, כאילו נעשו כליו איבריו כלים לשכל הפועל, לא לשכל העיולי הנפעל בו היה משתמש לפני כן. עת היה מבקש את הדרך הנכונה ומוצאה פעמים אחדות ופעמים רבות לא הגיע אליה. ואילו אתה מוצא הוא תמיד, מדרגה זו היא תכלית מה שהאדם השלם מקווה להגיע אליו, אחרי שתטוהר נפשו מן הספקות ותשיג את ידיעת הדברים לפי אמיתתם. So I want to say a few things about this idea. I mean, this is a version of Aristotle conceptions, a certain idea of Aristotle conceptions of human perfection, and it has to do with their conception of knowledge. So you have to think about knowledge, truths. You have to think about a kind of a universal mind, which they call the active intellect, השכל הפועל. There is a universal mind that contains all the truths about the world. Right? It is a reservoir of all truths. And when the human mind moves from potentiality to action, actually it gets identified with the knowledge it gains. Right? You become identified. Actually, if we want to understand the kind of a common sense conception of it, you become identified with what you have in mind. That's whom you are. Now, if you regain truths about the world, if you regain the proper understanding of the world, of God, and physics and everything, your mind becomes truth. It is identified as truth. Thus, you cleave. There is a concept of Jakut. You cleave and become one with this universal mind called the active intellect. So there is I would say the following, if you want to get a common sense conception. If you reveal something, let's say you study science, and you follow a proof in mathematics or in physics, and you follow a proof. Right? And you, by that, transcend your condition, your earthly false condition. You transcend, there is an act of transcendence through knowledge. I don't know if you had such an experience, but sometimes, even learning a good sugya, when you feel you really grasped its essence, right? And you made an effort. There is a moment, right, in which you feel you transcend your material world, identifying as if your mind.
You feel elevated.
Elevated. There is
Effervescence.
a sense of elevation through knowledge. Through asaga. Now the philosopher, through his ongoing pursuit of wisdom, he's a lover of wisdom, through his devotion, all-hearted devotion to wisdom, which is the core of his life, right? Socrates says, an unexamined life is a life unworthy of living, right? So there is a pursuit of understanding of wisdom, which then its achievement, I mean it's gradual, but its achievement elevates the philosopher from the temporal condition and identifies that philosopher with truth. That's the idea of perfection.
Who's the first that comes up with this idea? Is Aristotle himself?
Well, Aristotle, yeah. Aristotle has his...
it's a made-up thing. I'm saying it's...
Of course,
today,
you have...
nothing,
What?
It's an example.
There's nothing today that we could prove.
Actually, we don't have a concept. We don't have a concept of a universal mind, right? This epistemological idea that there is somewhere out there
The truth.
a universal mind. There are conceptions of truth, but it's contained within what they call an active intellect. That it's an Aristotelian conception. He had his own reasons why he thought this way. And we don't have a sense of acquiring knowledge, therefore cleaving or having dvekut or merging with that universal mind. We don't have that.
Right.
But still. And that's the core concept, the core intuition we do have in our experience, in a deep experience of knowing, in different realms of our life, a sense of transcending, elevating through knowledge, as if you expand your horizon, right? As if your mind gets more and more expansive. By the way, different people who are engaged in learning, in a devotional idea of learning, forgetting yourself. By the way, one feature, sometimes you work on a problem. Let's say you're a mathematician, but not only a Talmid Chochem, working on a problem. One feature of it is that you forget the time that passed, as if you weren't there. You wait, you get up from your chair and you say, well, 6 hours have gone. I haven't noticed even. And not only that, I haven't noticed anything that went around me. It's a way also, so there is this idea without this conception.
So you say it is a phenomenon that happens?
It is a phenomenon that we experience, definitely.
It happens with running as well.
What?
It happens with runners as well. They call it flow. It's not necessarily about knowledge.
Yeah, the idea of, but one thing which is, and here we have to make a difference between different ecstatic exercises, in which their aim is to empty the mind of particular content, right? Through repetition, breathing, repetition. It's meditative practices of emptying your consciousness, right? Allowing yourself as if connection to the whole. Through that, you would say running, breathing, dancing, singing, right? A repetitive ecstasy. Ecstasy means living outside your body. That's not the philosopher conception, right? We have to make a difference between different ways of transcending your own limited being. The philosopher does it through a particular content, through rational pursuit of understanding. Hence he is free from what he would say imaginative, ecstatic experiences, right? It's all controlled by wisdom. We have those experiences deeply. We don't need the idea of a universal entity.
The reason why I'm asking, because it's a very important question, because and if the Rambam, this is going to be a Shur Sanefesh, and this is so
okay.
we
We'll
need to give it.
Yeah, we're going to talk about. I'm now talking about the certain type of an experiential element of pursuit of wisdom that has to do with self-transcendence, which, by the way, very important to distinguish between different mystical experience that has to do with emptying consciousness. That's the whole point. Emptying consciousness from any content through repetition of mere words or mere movements, that whatever the content is, etc. By the way, I just want to say two things about the mystical experience. And attention in conception of pleasure. They all talk about oneg, right? The language of oneg is very prevalent in Jewish mysticism, philosophy, etc. There are two conceptions of oneg. And oneg, pleasure, right? There are two conceptions. One is the human experience of suffering has to do with the fact of desire, right? You desire, you fulfill, you lack, you fulfill, you are in the hands, you're fluctuating in the hands of desire. Now, overcoming the fluctuation of desire through an act of nirvana. Nirvana means shutting your desiring aspect, right? Getting into this kind of a mode of non-desire. It's very deep, by the way. It could be done in different techniques. That's one thing. There is a different thing, which is actually the opposite, and it has to do with expanding the horizons of experience. You hear more, you see more, you feel more. By the way, those who are interested in different drugs, there are different effects of different drugs in terms of their impact on consciousness. But in terms of spiritual exercises, right? By the way, also in the Jewish mystical tradition, there are two very different ones. One is removing yourself from the grip of will, from that shift. And the other one, by the way, if you see Ramban, Maimonides, Ramban in his description of the mystical experience, you shed yourself of the flesh, let's say, of the eyes, and you see more. You just see more, hear more, feel more. Have you ever experienced that? Just expanding the horizons of sensation is a great act of pleasure. Right?
Every time we come here to the Kerem Shirim, we experience it. When we come to the Kerem Shirim, we experience it.
Wonderful.
Awareness, no?
So, but we can maybe do one time. Actually, not do one time. This is an opportunity for us to explore varieties of mystical philosophical experiences. Right? Right? You read Abulafia, you read other people who, in our tradition, wrote about it, and you see there are two very different modes of doing it. One is expanding, right? If you shed yourself, if you manage to shed yourself the material cover of your senses, you're going to see more colors, hear more voice sounds, right? The spectrum of your experience will be far greater and greater and greater. This is the ultimate oneg experienced in a certain practices, or, which is very different, which is kind of a nirvana kind of shutting the painful movement of desire, lack, desire, lack,
Kind of
desire.
a Stoic approach, like?
What?
Kind of a Stoic
It's
approach.
not Stoic. The Stoics are different. I will talk about Stoicism. Stoicism is not a mystical practice. But if you read in Buddhist traditions and others, what they call the state of nirvana is the state of no desire, right? What the Maggid, the Maggid Mimezrich said, all practices, all religious practices have to move the yud of the ani from the end to the middle, right? Shifting, making the ani an ayin, right? That's the whole practice. Which is, all, by the way, all of them have one center, which is de-individuation. Right? You de-individualize yourself through different modes. Now, I'm saying that all this has to be carefully understood and spoken about and studied, etc. The philosopher who has very deep experience of expansion, it doesn't go through ecstatic mode of repetition and emptying consciousness. It doesn't go through the enlargement of sensual experience. By the way, those who do drugs, I don't. But some friends of mine describe to me different, in LSD, etc. You just see more, hear more, etc., etc. Other drugs are shut your particular awareness and desire, etc. In the philosophical tradition, that's why very powerful. It's all done through chokhmah. It's very deep, by the way. And we all, I think, here and there in our life, have such experiences, right? Where you overcome your finitude and you're being trapped in your own bodily temporal existence through understanding, especially if that understanding contains something which is eternal as such, not what you read in the newspaper today. For example, I'll give you an example. You read a newspaper piece, right? You say, okay, I learned something which is temporal. Doesn't elevate me. It might be very important for me. But when I see a pattern in the newspaper, I can see a pattern. I see a larger scheme here at work. I understand something deep about power, about human motivations, etc. I grow. I expand, right? So there is if we think about nature, understanding the causal structure of the universe, those eternal truths, right? And they're beautiful, right? Because they are in modern science. They are formulated in very beautiful equations, right? Einstein always detested equations that are too far-fetched. They're klein, dislike them.
Predict.
There is a beauty in the simplicity and totality of this understanding that elevates you. Now we come to this world has a particular baggage or has a particular way of being, which is, and we have to understand deeply where they're striving at, because they had a lot of influence on Machshava Yehudit. All those trends have a lot of influence on Machshava Yehudit, which is that they think that through wisdom you cleave yourself, you identify yourself with this kind of universal mind, you become one with the Sechel HaPoel. Your mind moves from potential to actual, and you become one with it, and through that you also overcome death. I want to explain to you this phantasmagoria.
What's the word?
Phantasmagoria, the fantasy, the philosophical fantasy of overcoming death. The perception, and there are many traditions like that, is what dies in us is what's individual to us, our particular memories, bonds, etc. All particular connections, etc. We as universal never die. For example, our matter will always exist in different forms. Our genes, if we think in modern biology, can exist. Generations, they can be found in, 10,000 years ahead. Right? Our genetic makeup, it passes, etc., etc. So us qua general beings, we never die. What dies in us is the individual. Right? It's our particular life, here and there, our connection to our children, to a country, to our dreams, the difficulty of separation. If you shed yourself of individuation, cleave yourself to what's general in you, you overcome death. That means achieving eternity. That's the philosophical understanding of Chaya Olam Haba, of Hisharut HaNefesh. What does it mean, Hisharut HaNefesh, in that understanding? Hisharut HaNefesh means someone who's through his life managed to overcome, shed everything that is individual in him, cleave to the general, that would never die, because truth never dies. It's always there. Right? We know of such practices, right? If you read Buddhist practices, but also practices in Jewish mysticism, etc. At the moment you become the whole never perishes. And if you understand that your being is just a fleeting illusion, and what underlies in you something which shares with the general whole, you overcome death. Right? For some of us might say, who cares about existing as a general entity? Right? We care about our individual bonds. We miss our children. I always think about dying. What's so difficult for me, at least. I'm not going to be there to give a hand to my children. I feel so difficult with that, just separation, not knowing what will happen to him. And I think, by the way, that having a knowledge without being capable of actually interfering, that's the definition of Gehenna. But in any event, for these traditions, right? For these traditions, what's common in all of them, be it mystical, philosophical, etc., is that inside, the death occurs in the individual level. And the human tragedy of the end is overcome if you shed yourself of all individuation, by the way, to a degree that when death occurs, you even don't notice it. That's the if you all read Rambam's conception of mitat neshika, right? As if it didn't occur because you didn't notice it in some ways. You were in a state of being that is completely not effectuated by death. Because what dies is the individual. Always what dies is the individual. Now, that's a very, the philosophers, in this way, the way it's described here, have a particular path to that human urge, which is overcoming finitude, transcending individuation and limits through chokhmah, through wisdom, right? And as you, by the way, the Rambam's one interpretation, this is an opportunity also to talk a little bit about Moreh Nevuchim. One interpretation of Hashgoche, it's difficult there are different understandings of Hashgoche in Moreh Nevuchim. One interpretation of Hashgoche is that when you're in that state of cleaving, nothing that is considered pain affects you. You're just completely beyond that. By the way, you will see physical pain, human loss, etc., etc. It's all, you're not there, right? You have identified internally with the eternal. That's your identity. By the way, sometimes you feel, in the tradition, sometimes you feel that this whole language about wisdom is transferred into Torah, right? If you're cleaving to the world of God, through the word of God, through learning, then nothing can happen to you in the sense that, not that bad things would not happen to you, but they'll not be considered by you as tragedies, as wrongs, as etc., etc. So this is, if we want to understand what we did some work here. One is to understand the whole path of religious philosophical traditions that are motivated by that urge, but they take different forms. They take different forms, different modes, right? Now, some will say, some modern critics will say, yes, that's an inauthentic way of being. That's a confusion. If you're nothing, doesn't mean you're everything. You're just nothing. That's the big mystical fallacy. You can shed yourself. You can move that yud from the end of the ani to the middle. It doesn't mean you become the Ein Sof. You just become nothing.
Why use the word mystical? You're not only going with mystical, but you say even philosophical.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
also
By the way, by mystical, I don't mean doing magic and miracles.
No, I'm saying we're talking now about Aristotle's approach. It doesn't have to do with mystical.
I want to say
It's not
something.
mystical.
No, I want to say something. Let's call it rational mysticism.
Okay.
By mystical, I mean a
Metaphysics.
path in which you go through de-individuation. Right? You shed your individuality, merging yourself with the totality of being, but in the philosophical tradition, it's done through wisdom. Actually, your mind is utterly aware. That's different than actually emptying your mind through repetition of names, meditation.
What's the
etc.
definition of mysticism that you call it mystical?
The definition of, mysticism is so much
Right.
definition. I'm giving a definition which is true and not true in many ways, but it's true to our purposes, which is there is a whole group of human experience that it aims is to overcome.
It's not Torah to Kabbalah. It's
No,
the
no,
Nirvana
no,
state,
no,
the
no.
mysticism.
Yeah, I mean achieving a mode of
Transcendence
consciousness,
from the physical
achieving a mode of consciousness that aims at shedding individuation while cleaving, while achieving the dvekut with something which is eternal, the whole, the infinite, etc. You might say God. You can call it in a different way. This is a path. This is a general title for the sake of this conversation. definition of mysticism. There's a good book by Underhill called Mysticism, actually, where I'm following her definition. But that's not that important. What I'm saying is the following. You see a general tendency, which is very common in different cultures, including Yiddishkeit in different forms, that strives to overcome the boundedness, the limitation of bodily finite existence through some type of spiritual exercise that engages transcendence. Yeah, different modes. You have seen it in different ways. You have read it without actually really conceptualizing it or thinking about it. But I'm sure it evokes in you different memories, different gestures, different languages, etc., etc.
But that causes the individual to be irresponsible many times.
Okay,
He doesn't
now here's
care
a
about his
question.
kids.
I mean, by the way, is it the halachic way of being? It's a different question. There is a big tension between the religious ideals of halacha, right? יפה שעה אחת של תורה ומעשים טובים, של תשובה ומעשים טובים בעולם הזה מכל חיי העולם הבא. You know, there is something about halacha that grounds you to the here and now, etc., etc. There is a huge tension, by the way, between these ideals and halachic life within Yiddishkeit as well, right?
Ben Azai, we see.
Yeah, we have a lot of issues. By the way, if you learn Chassidus, which is geared at the ideal of dvekut, right, with its own techniques of dvekut, it has its own techniques, its own ideas of how you achieve it, etc., etc. It's all in tension with halacha, as kind of grinding you in the here and now, in the doing actions in the world. So here's the question, right? Does it withdraw you from care of the world, right? Is a way of escaping your reality through entering a trance. It's a huge issue.
Not only halacha, but just altogether.
Altogether, but halacha is a feature of our responsibility to each other, to the world, to you know, etc. Time, right?
Go to daven mincha.
Exactly. I remember when I was a little kid, that's actually my definition of Chassidus. Reb Shmuel Rozovsky is a great Talmud Chochem. He was a relative of ours, so I heard it from a Talmud of his. He was very ill, and they told him to give a kvittel to the Lelover. So he asked, they pressured him. So he asked, what's so great about the Lelover? They said he is in such a state of dvekus that mincha ends for him in Ma'ariv, that Motzei Shabbos in Tuesday, etc. So Shmuel said, "Akvitlich v'shiken, azeigerich v'shiken." So this whole yes, exactly what you asked. This is the achievement of a state of atemporal cleaving is in tension, in deep tension, with another completely mode of time-bound responsibility, right? יפה שעה, right? יגיעו ימים שאין בהם חפץ, right? The Gemara said, right? שאין בהם לא תורה, לא מעשים טובים. That's אוי למאבד, you know. It says this state of eternal bliss looks. And some would say it's completely inauthentic. So it's an escape from. Some people will say, by way of some modern existentialists, but maybe some also. It's overcoming death by preempting it, by actually achieving it in life, dying to life. So, there is. So these are deep issues, right? By the way, very interesting if you study Moreh Nevuchim, right? Moreh Nevuchim describes this experience in Daled Nun Aleph. In Gimel Nun Aleph. what she calls a state of ahava, where your mind is so occupied with those truths that your actions in the world is like you're an automatic pilot. You know, this is the experience where your mind is somewhere else, you know, of being in love. Right?
Nafshi chashka b'toira.
You are an automatic pilot. You do things as if you're not there, right? You're not fully there. So there is a problem, by the way, the philosophers. This idea, by the way, it's a tension in Aristotle itself. In Yirtzeh Hashem, if we're going to study Aristotle ethics, it's a tension between the political virtue and the philosophical virtue. That's the book 10 of the ethics, the philosophical idea. And that exactly. But it's interesting. He says that it affects, in this section, it affects your actions that are done in a proper way with no struggle, because you have overcome the material urges, the human chukot, not by repressing them, but actually attaching yourself to a greater chukah, right? A greater eros, right? The eros of wisdom. And that then all other things don't, you know, all the human flaws. It's not milchemet hayetzer in the way. Again, by the way, that's a theme in Chassidus.
I think you should elaborate
Die
a
hat ze
little
hadden
bit
vergessen
more,
von ihm.
because I think you went in another subject
Right.
about the errors that you could switch it to a different.
Right.
I think
What
you
I
should
wanna
elaborate
say
a little
the
bit more
following.
on this.
Yes.
On this.
Okay.
Yeah,
I want to explain something which is a certain misconception of philosophy as a kind of a rational, detached, unemotional, unpassionate mode of being, as if there is the cold people and the warm people. It's a kind of a temperature. No, that's a misconception of. We talked about that. Yeah. I don't know if you read Plato's Symposium, right? That's a symposium about love. And he says that all the earthly love, all our desires, etc., can be our shadows, our mere passing shadows of greater passion that we have to something that transcends us. Also, it's kind of something eternal, something true, right? And therefore, it is a mode not of repressing passion, but directing it in a deep way. It's an obsession, right? I don't know if you remember in Orchos Tshuva, Rambam's description of the one who has love of God in it. It's a kind of an ultimate obsession.
He says that to the base.
Yeah, you have ultimate obsession, and if you achieve that madrega, the ongoing struggles, the kind of daily struggles with this desire, that desire, are not there anymore.
You believe that the obsession that the person has the Gashmi, you think the Avot, you really think that it's
Well, there are two ways of going
like
about
Benazai,
it.
that you can really do it in Torah?
Well, I mean, there are different ways of going about it. Some of them says, just try to crush it. Some of it, try to achieve them, but moderately. But some of it works, is the way in which you can elevate them, supplement them, and elevate them to
And you don't
higher.
have the need, you don't even have the need.
And then it's not, they're fulfilled in a greater realm, right? So I'll give you an example. I don't know if you've met people, I'm sure you met people who are genuinely Talmidei Chachomim, but genuinely, right? And their pleasure, the Gdolim I met were naughty, were full of Yetzer. They open a blood gemore like a child that enters a big toy store. Right? They were visceral in learning.
Excited.
Even a cold fish like Rav Elyoshiv. right? My brother's very close to him. I used to go to a shiur. He was like a kid when teaching, he was a very disciplined person. But when he began to learn, you saw he's having fun. He's really having fun. And he was humorous in a beautiful way, right? It was in a shiur, an American Talmud. I think Mir has a lot of American kids who come. And he was trying to ask in Yiddish. His Yiddish wasn't that good. So he asked this, that. Rabbi Yosef was very patient with him. And at the end he explains to him, he says, okay. Rabbi Yosef says, okay, kind of in a naughty way. There was this, now if you ask them, all these issues of possession, place in the world, the competition, is not interest of them. I mean, clearly there are moments of human limitations where they fall, where they don't fully transcend. But if we meet someone who makes a huge impression on us, by the way, I meet scientists like that, mathematicians or scientists. They don't care about the human achievements of power.
And you know Elam Hazard.
Yeah, and they're just into their, they are somewhere else in their passion. They're obsessed. Well, how do you know it? By the one thing, that's the Rambam's definition of nevuah, is the effect it has in a dream life, right? I have a friend, a mathematician, who came one morning, he says, I woke up in the morning, I said, I found a solution to a particular mathematical theorem. And I said to him, you know what the difference between me and you? It wouldn't happen to me. Why? Because your all day is in math. And that's what you dream about.
But you said even more than that.
I'm saying I'm saying the following, that what they have achieved, and that's a practice we know when we meet great people, we don't see in them the scars of ongoing struggle against themselves. What we see is a cleaving, is a way in which their own passion is about spiritual transcendent concerns. And therefore, again, by the way, there are so many different ways of living a life, right? And therefore, it's a way of overcoming particular temptations, resentments, and there is, by the way, a lot of love in it, a lot of love and compassion that comes with it. Right? Because you see people as if in their, you might say, in their limitations, not by way of being arrogant, by the capacity to forgive them, to overcome resentments, pettiness. It's really about overcoming pettiness. By the way, what I'm describing is, if we read serious work in Chassidus, right? Part of the Chidush of Chassidut, the great Chidush of Chassidut, which was very against Chassidei Ashkenaz and all their practices of asceticism and tzomot and breaking the wheel through acts of self-punishment, is the idea that you can attach your desires, your particular desires, to their source in the general. Ahava is just a particular manifestation of a greater source of being that you attach yourself. Now, you might be skeptical, and I see some movements of skepticism. But
no, I'm skeptical that I think it's an imagination, and that's what I'm asking. I'm trying to understand if you understand it. But then as I replaced it in the learning, erotica, and this, I think it's a little bit too far.
I'm trying.
Too far.
No,
very real.
I'm trying
I agree with you.
to anchor it.
I didn't ask about
I would say the following. I'm trying to, all good philosophical, it's one rule of, for me at least, in life, in philosophy or in learning. All good philosophical works always attached to some type of the intuition that we share. If it's not, then it's very hard to anchor it in our experience. So what I'm trying to do, I'm saying, let's leave the stuff about the cosmic mind, etc., etc. We are talking about a particular practice that has to do with two main features. It comes in different shapes, different modes, etc., etc. It has to do with expansion of the self, transcending the boundaries of the self, through different forms of practices. That's one thing. And I said there are different modes of doing it, right? What the philosophers, the main thrust of the philosophers, it's done through careful reasoning, right? And the other thing is that this type of practice, which we experience in different moments in our life, helps people in overcoming pettiness, inner struggles, striving for things that are not that important, something that you realize. When, by the way, in our understanding of what's important in life, many times, it's a kind of a reevaluation. Right, reevaluation.
Yes, but we're taking it even far. You're taking even saying it's even an erotic experience.
Yeah, by erotic I mean
it's already
by
taking it much farther than just overcoming pettiness and.
No, by erotic I mean we have passion towards something, and directing that passion. You can call it shmerotic. It's not important.
It's
but
important.
I mean it's the.
It's important.
No, I mean
they talk about it.
It's the passionate.
Eris.
Of course,
Experience is the passion.
It's
you
the
feel.
passionate striving. Of course, I'm. A lot of what I'm saying is. I just want to say one interesting thing, one tension, particularly in tradition of emptying consciousness, the act of dveikus that engages emptying consciousness, so you can generalize your existence, is always in tension with the limud of halacha, because halacha keeps your mind busy with more and more particular things. Right? You take, let's say, there is a mitzvah of bor, right? In nezikin, av nezikin of bor, and if you're a talmid chochem, you'll ask, okay, what's the depth of the bor? Is it in reshus hayochid? Is it in reshus harabim? If a behemoth came next to the bor, kelim, adam, etc., who has to carry compensation, who is responsible of covering it, etc., etc., etc. What you do, rather than move it back to the general, you make it more and more and more and more detailed, etc., etc. You run against the mystical thrust, and this is why, in the history of Jewish mysticism, there is a lot of resistance to limud. You know, it's Tikkunei Zohar said, "Vayavidu Mitzrayim את בני ישראל בחומר ובלבנים, בחומר זה קל וחומר ובלבנים זה גזירה שווה." And I think in the Tikkunei Zohar, I can give you the reference. I think I heard there is a saying in Baal Shem that when he learns Gemara, he contemplates the white between the black letters. So what I want to say, this is all intention both in the thrust of halachic responsibility and also in the trust of what do you occupy your mind with. So, and it has an interesting history, by the way, right? In Shivcha Besht, the Maggid says, I stop my limud from time to time to achieve the state of Zakut. And if you read Nefesh HaChaim,
that's the
right, it's all trying to overcome the problem of achieving dveikus through actually particularizing your mind with more and more detailed engagement with the actualities of the world, and if it's a בור like this and בור like that, פתחו ברשות הרבים, ברשות היוחיד, etc., 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 the whole סוגיה. Okay. So, what we so let's just see.
I'll open on the floor.
Just we'll finish this section and we'll open the floor. It says, ככה תעשה הנפש דומה למלאך.
Before you go, I would like if you could say 2 or 3 words about Seichel Ayili.
Seichel Ayili means potential, our potential of knowledge that becomes Seichel HaPoel. It moves from potential capacity of knowing to...
It's a Greek word.
Ayuli, Ayuli is a Greek word, yeah. Ayuli means in potentia, in potential.
What does he say? Lo l'seichel Ayili hanifal.
Anifal, that is...
The opposite of Ayili, the actuality?
Potential, b'koyach v'lei b'poyach.
Ayuli anifal, that he's going to become something.
Does it come?
Activated, right.
Okay.
Now he says, ככה תעשה הנפש דומה למלאך, ותימצא במדרגה אחת בלבד, למטה משל הרוחני הנלדף מן הגוף, הלא היא מדרגת השכל הפועל, הוא המלאך אשר מדרגתו נמוכה רק משל המלאך הממונה על גלגל הירח, והמלאכים הם זכלים נבדלים מן החומר קדמונים כסיבה הראשונה, ולא יראו כליון לעולם. Right? It's this idea of independent mind spheres, ובהתאחד נפש האדם השלם עם השכל הפועל, לא יחוש האדם לכליון גופו ולחניון כליו. Here is what we talked about, the achievement of eternity.
What does it mean, כליו?
כליו means is limbs.
גופו וכליו.
ומשעה שהגיע להתאחדות זאת, תזכה נפשו לאושר בעודו בחיים, שכן נכנס בחברתם של הרמס ואלסקביליוס וסוקרטס ואפלטון ואריסטו, כי הוא והם וכל אשר עלו למנהגם הם לאחד עם השכל הפועל, וזהו אשר יכונה על דרך העברה הוא קירוב רצון אלוהים. So,
what does it mean, רצון אלוהים? The Seichel HaPoel?
Yeah, the Seichel HaPoel is the will of God.
God's will, not God's wisdom?
Well, that's what he said by way of mashal, by way of analogy, right? It's since it's being caused by God, is as if it is the will of God. Okay.
Okay, so now open the door. You'll be
Well, I'm just gonna. I have a few things to say, but I'm just gonna say like something that I'm trying to understand. This idea that the moon is like that, like there's like a measurement where the Seichel HaPoel sits. That's Aristotelian. Yeah. This idea that it was like imaginary. Somebody came up with it. Like, had a moment of nirvana and imagined. I want to ask in a better way.
Sure.
Was there a need for them to find a place for it? Like, is that what's motivated it?
So I'll tell you the vision of Aristotle's universe, which he articulates in his physics and his work on the skies. You see the movements of the sky. Well, they thought, he thinks that the Earth is stable, right? It's at the center of the universe. We are very, very far away from it. The universe is a closed system.
We're familiar with the cosmology of it. We're trying to understand, like, we know the world is not stale, right? We know it. Do we need to find a new place for the Seichel HaPoel? Or is this like, we can forget about it, it's not really part of the conversation?
We can, by the way, say, here's a question. Is this all mode of what is called spiritual exercise? depended upon those assumptions, the
Right.
particular
I don't
assumptions.
think
And the
so.
issue, the answer is no.
So what was the need of finding a moon next to it? Like
Because
today, we would, if Aristotle
there's
would be here
no
today,
moon.
he would say,
Because this is the way that
black hole, it sits in the black hole, that's what he would say today?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, so I understand the need now,
Alright.
he has to
Yeah.
find a place for it.
Yeah, I mean, he had independent reasons for his cosmology. There were independent reasons. I mean, I can articulate them. Right? It had to do with the fact that when you see, let's say, the movement of the sun, you see structure of repetition that doesn't change,
Mhm.
and it's eternal. So it must be far more sublime than our world.
But didn't the professor, that's why the professor
Okay.
spoke.
Whatever, I mean,
No,
we,
yeah, but didn't the professor, that's why you spoke in length to explain that let's think a little bit our own intuition, how
Absolutely.
we tap into this.
Yeah, but
Because he wanted, why did he do it? Because he wanted to explain, let's not get carried
I
away
know,
with
but
the words.
why
what
did
they're
they?
saying.
Why did they need to get carried away
Yeah,
this way?
and
In
one
this funny,
thing-
made-up way.
Right.
right, so I would say.
We understood it without it. That's the
Great,
point.
I would say it doesn't come from a need, it comes from a particular orientation to the world
Uh huh.
that they saw. It comes from physics.
Mm-hmm.
You might say now wrong physics, but it had its own logic at the time.
Okay.
Can you
Right.
say that?
That's yeah. But you're right. We can that thrust is independent of that in a deep way. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Isn't it that they can't imagine that a human brain should be smart or godly? Like, they just can't fathom such an idea. That a human brain, in the brain or in the heart, whatever it is, that can make divine calculations. as
Who
they-
can't imagine?
The philosophers. They would rather put it somewhere outside.
Oh, you're answering my question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a good way of putting it. You know, their practices would claim that there is an eternal essence of the divine in you,
Mhm.
right? Which you just have to, when you shed your particular
That comes
consciousness,
out,
you're gonna be in touch with it. As if there is a divine substance, but that's very different from, you're right. It's-
Some people refer to it as the Nachal Noiva Nivea Makoi Chochma.
Right.
It's also a term that's used. I mean, it's
Right.
Rosh Hashanah, Oman, but
Right.
that's a term that's used as the source of all knowledge.
Yes, so the idea is, by the way, one, you would say, one feature of a intellectual experience, let's say if you are a thinker, or if you, let's say you study Black Gemara, one feature of a serious thought is its fertility. By fertility I mean, if it's a good thought, it will lead to another
Multiply.
one. And it will lead to another one, another one, another. You're going to begin to see connections. Hmm? פורה, מחשבה פוריה. It's a sign of a serious thought, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
so I want to go back to what you said. I can understand people have different pleasures because because pleasures is driven by pain, so whatever person's pleasure is, if it's mathematics, if it's science, or if it's physics, or if it's Gemara, this is what drives their pleasure. But you said that they're no longer penniless. I want to ask you, so people, scientists or
Right.
mathematicians, they don't care who wins the Nobel Peace Prize? Don't they
Of
have
course,
jealousy?
of course.
So they still have pettiness when it's
Sure,
when it's in their
sure.
realm of pleasures.
Well,
It is pettiness.
well, first of all, many of the real, you do see, and you encounter it, either in Talmidei Chachomim, genuinely, a real anava. By anava I mean disregard of the need for recognition, which drives so many people all the time.
We started by saying that Aristotle is a vice.
That-
Anava.
We
no,
have-
no,
We have,
I
we
meant
have,
a
like-
different.
this is
a
for
we
different-
Baruch Hashem have this here, we have a little bit of example here in the room.
No, I mean
Fairness,
something.
I'm saying that I
I'm,
think
I'm
that
saying something. If you sometimes encounter,
But that's driven because you seek the truth, and whatever the truth is, you don't care if it's you or somebody else.
Yeah.
yeah,
So-
But that's not about pleasure.
no,
That's not about pleasure.
It's also
If you have a pleasure about the
I'll
Gemara,
tell you
you're
one
still
thing.
driven by getting the
I
pleasure.
also tell you one thing, which is I think it's true about learning as well. There must be something wrong if you suffer while you're doing it. Right?
No, you only have pleasure
In
if you
learning.
suffer, right?
In learning. If it's a genuine learning, it expands your mind, and it's a,
Nice.
and it's
Teilishma.
it doesn't engage in agony, right? By the way, this is why it's infectious. I remember I had a teacher who all of his learning was a sense. You saw he was an exemplar of duty, you know. He was a mathsmith of duty, and it was something to admire, but it wasn't infectious. Because pleasure is infectious, joy is infectious. So I would say, I mean, you see, one, I would say the following. I think, by the way, among kids, the ultimate sign of talent is curiosity. No other, I think, if you look for kisharon in kids, the first thing is, are they curious? And what is curiosity? It's just the drive to know more, right? And that's a source of immense joy. And that joy lifts you from the pettiness and competitiveness. Now, it doesn't mean it will be both hypocritical and presumptuous to say, well, all those people who do that are kind of, they're not under the human, you know, we see too many book reviews to understand jealousy and pettiness, etc. So clearly. But among the real Gdolim, I think you encounter that. Seriously. You do.
absolutely.
Yes.
The question is that is it, let's say, according to the Rambam, intellectual Rambam has the reasoning. He also has like emotion involved.
Of course.
Like the Rambam says that the shush is going udam, the mass of
course.
Yisav. He uses or the Rambam that you refer
Of
to,
course.
the Habas.
Of
He
course.
should be like a very obsessive to
Of
have.
course.
It's gonna it involves emotion. Sometimes it goes from emotion to rationality, something like the intuition that you're
There's
saying.
there's an emotion from experiencing rationality.
So,
I tend to be careful making a distinction between rationality and emotion. Right? It's and where do you see the connection? Is both in the act of cleaving with the quest of understanding, you know, the drive to understand, and also the pleasure in understanding, the expansion that comes in understanding. It's very powerful. It's not a detached, calculated machine.
the question is where it starts. Look, according to,
Right.
the perception is that the Rambam, like, it starts from intellectual, like, being
Right.
like,
Understanding,
God.
sure.
But the professor is saying it's not intellectual.
It's through the work of
Through
argument,
intellectuality.
through you know, yes.
Fine.
So you mentioned before the Rambam in Perek Niyan Aleph about the meditation that he speaks about. But it's always interesting that the Perek after that he speaks about Tzedek, and usually people that go into this type of world of asceticism or very strong meditation disconnect from the world. They don't care about human suffering anymore.
Right.
They don't care about Tzedek.
Right.
So the Rambam seems to
Yes.
want you should have both, but I don't think it ever worked that way.
It's a deep question.
It's like the professor said, the student between Aristo himself and
Right.
Yeah, but he seems to, the Rambam seems to want to
So-
have both.
Yeah,
How
you
does that
might
work?
say, you
Balance.
might say, you end up returning to the world. It's a real issue, by the way. It's a real tension to work out, and it's a tension within that quest and halacha. One way to go about it, one way, which is a little bit here, is that when you are in that state, right, of dvekut, there is something deeply generous and full of love to everyone and everything. There is such a thing, right, where you see the world from the perspective of the totality of it. And that's the way he describes it, right? And as if it flows from you, that flows from you. You see people, real tzaddikim or serious spiritual people in that state. If it's not fake, it's powerful, right? You can fake it, but then you can discover it very easily.
But the danger of disconnection is very, very
Absolutely, absolutely, and there
Even
will
in
be.
tzaddikim sometimes you
Of
see
course, absolutely. There's a story about the Kotzker, I think, that I think his son-in-law was, I don't know if it's Kotzker or the Gererov, that is, they were studying and there was a cry of a baby. And
The Mittler Rebbe with
The Mittler Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe.
yeah, so it's an interesting thing, right? Yeah, all this is in real, what we are doing is saying, look, there is a thrust of that quest that has to do with de-individuation, overcoming the particular, in this case through knowledge. It's a source of self-transcendence in a serious way. And then there will be criticism of that mode. Absolutely, yeah.
This is
Achron
it.
Chaviv, huh?
Okay, well, actually, between the two of them, they already
Right.
kind of touched on what I was trying to ask. But there's
Right.
still one part that I want to
Okay.
try to get some clarification. If somebody devotes his life, so to speak, to the study of philosophy,
Wisdom, yeah.
but he never reaches that part where it actually brings him into that what you call cleaving. And does it mean that he never really entered that realm?
Right, it's interesting. So first, it's not binary. It's not either or. It's scalar.
Because just to
And
clarify, there are
I-
people that will literally hold themselves back from going there because they are philosophers. They are consumed with just the study of philosophy,
Right.
and that's all they care about. But it will not allow themselves to let it take off and bring them into
So-
that.
So I would say it's not a binary either or. Either you there. So for example, when the Rambam would do the differences between different Nevi'im, questions is how steady is that state? What's the duration? What's the intensity? What's the scope of understanding? All this is a matter of degree. And by the way, we are all simple people, have glimpses of that experience in our life, in different moments. And the idea is, can we expand this? The more we expand it, the more we transcend ourselves, we overcome ourselves, etc. So it's not a binary either or. It's scalar, and they're all very aware. They're very aware of that fact, that there is growth, that there is difference. Even within your own life, you see degrees of progress or regress, etc. And I want to say one very important thing. They all understand, and soon we're going to come to it. This is very important for our theme in general. That this type of existence depends on political stability. It's very hard to maintain that mode of consciousness under ongoing threat.
You have to run for your life.
Starvation. This is why Rambam says, in Goles there is no nevuah. Not because, like Halevi, because God is not in God, God is a territorial entity. No, because under ongoing anxiety and distress, the capacity of that form of transcendence is very difficult. This is why well-ordered societies
Produce the biggest.
should allow this human flourishing. What is good politics in the Aristotelian world? A good political order is a world that created enough stability of needs and predictability in our life so genuine human flourishing is possible. Because it's very hard to maintain that genuine human flourishing under conditions of ongoing fear.
It's like Maslow's
Starvation.
hierarchy of needs.
Yeah. I mean, it's very difficult, very difficult. So it runs against this romantic idea that the greater the pain, the greater the insight. No. If humans are under threat of hunger,
Okay.
or fear, or
Close
terror,
it, we can go.
they cannot overcome. Get that. So what we need is human flourishing. Okay.
Haralom, are you referring to that quip that Kabbalah may be nonsense, but the study of Kabbalah is academia, no?
That's a different
Because
conversation.
you were also asking the same question.
Okay.
No, no,
Sorry, you're
Okay.
not getting to it.
Okay.
Floor is closed now.
Okay.
Study of
Uh,
the history.
Okay, he says, דרשהו אפוא, בקש לך ידיעת דברים על אמיתתם, למען יהיה שיחך אתה פועל ולא נפעל. ותדבק בדרך הישרים במידות
What do you
ובמעשים.
mean nif'al? It has potential, but
potential.
it doesn't use out
Yeah.
potential.
ותדבק בדרך הישרים ובמידות ובמעשים, כי הם יהיו לך לעזר בהכרת האמת, ויעוררוך לדבוק בעיון ולהידמות לשכל הפועל ההוא. אז תעלנה בידיך מידות ההסתפקות והענווה והכניעה וכל מידה טובה. ואיתם הערצת הסיבה הראשונה שתעריצה לא למען תכוננך רצון ותסיר מעליך קצפה, כי למען תוכל להידמות לשכל הפועל, לבחור תמיד באמת, לתת לכל דבר את תאריו הראויים לו, ולראות כל דבר כמו שהוא באמת, כי כל אלה מתכונות השכל. So we have gone through this passage. וכאשר תגיע מחשבתך לאמונה הזאת, אל תחוש באיזה מין ממיני העבודה אתה עובד לאלוה, או איך תתפלל ואיך תשבח, באיזה דיבור ובאיזה לשון ובאיזה מעשים. If you are in that state, or you're following this path, the question of a particular religion that you have doesn't make a difference. בדי לך, ואם תרצה, if you wish, בדי לך דעת.
למה לידת בכלל?
Soon we're going to get to למה לך דעת. לשם העבודה והרצה והשיבוח ולמען התנהגותך אתה במידות טובות והנהגת ביתך ובני ארצך בהם אם מקובל אתה עליהם או קח לך לדעת את אחד החוקות השכליות שהונחו על ידי הפילוסופים מחובריהם ושים מגמתך וכוונתך זיכוך נפשך. כללו של דבר, אחרי שיגך את הידיעה הכללית של הדברים לפי אמיתתם, בקש לך זוך הלב ככל אשר תוכל, ואז תגיע למבקושך שהוא ההידבקות ברוחני ההוא, זאת אומרת בשכל הפועל. ואז ייתכן כי הרוחני ההוא ינבא אותך, והוא יודיעך תעלומות על ידי חלומות אמיתיים וציורי דברים נכונים. Soon we're going to get to the end of Nevuah. But what he says is the following. It's actually the philosopher's attitude to established religion. They have nothing to do with their truth value. They're just very useful tools of social order and well-being. And it's good for society to have religion. Whatever religion it is, be this religion, be that religion, etc., right? Because it encourages disciplines. And also, and that's very important, here we enter a certain elitism of the philosopher. The masses are motivated by reward and punishment. And they're not going to do the right things unless they think that someone is watching them and will take account of everything they do, right? It's what they called, Rambam calls it necessary beliefs, not particularly true beliefs, but necessary for social order. Emunot echrachiyot, right? And religion has a great social function. This is why, by the way, philosophers should never undermine public religion. Never. It would be irresponsible for them to propound their theories for the uninitiated, because they're going to undermine something very precious and important about communal order of life.
Not only they shouldn't undermine, they can also be a lot of times the aware of the
Yeah, of course. Sometimes they can lead it and can talk this language, etc., etc. They have to be very responsible leaders. And therefore, from the perspective of the philosopher, all this issue of what the true religion is about is a meaningless question. Religion is not neither about truth or false. It's just a very necessary tool of well-ordered society. And here we have to remember...
At the time, today we have American government. They give you order without religion.
Okay, it's interesting, by the way. It's interesting among the liberal philosophers. When did they imagine a well-ordered secular society? By the way, it's very late. Even Spinoza didn't think that there is a possible of well-ordered secular society.
Even
Spinoza. Locke and others. It's Hume. It's very late in the... Voltaire used to say, if my servant wouldn't believe in God, providence, etc., he would slaughter me while I'm sleeping. There is this deep idea among them that both religion is a very important tool, very important, precious tool of communal order, of encouraging good dispositions.
That's it. Today, all slaughter in the world is because of religion, not the opposite way.
All right. You say, אם יש יראת אלוהים במקום הזה והרגוני. But in any event, this was the view, very deep view among the philosophers. About.
But do you agree to what he said, that today you think is different?
Well, here is a very interesting question, by the way.
Have secular
There are
societies.
some, you could say, yes, secular societies work and are well-ordered, well-behaved societies without a conception of providence and God. Well, some will say, and Leo Strauss and others would say, that depends on a condition of economic stability and opportunity.
That's always the case.
At the moment this will be challenged, you're going to see the monster appearing.
Maybe
And
Shah
there you
said it
need
50
religion.
years, 100 years ago.
And there you need
The
religion.
longest
Yes.
religion of America, no other religion produced 200 years of stability like America did.
Yeah, no,
Okay,
I'm not,
so-
I'm not, you're asking me,
I think it's based upon religious principles anyway.
You-
You can't
you
escape
ask-
it.
That's maybe.
You can't escape it.
no, one thing, by the way, one thing is that sense that ordinary people, that Kant had it, and others philosophers who thought that ordinary people appreciate doing the right thing for its own sake, without actually any conception of God involved. in it,
Right.
that there is a great power to it, and that's the source of. And then there are in the human dispositions of empathy and the need to cooperate and the rationality that comes with cooperation and good behavior, etc., can bring well-ordered societies without religion.
Mhm.
And you can say that religion then becomes a threat to well-ordered societies. And that has to do with the idea of taming the source of a lot of human pain comes from collective bodies, from political collective bodies, and liberalism, by containing those bodies, by restricting them under the rule of law, under constitutional structures and human rights, create a stable. Yeah, this is very powerful. You might say this is extremely powerful.
The Mishnah says, "Ilamulu meroshu malchus." They were ahead of the philosophers.
Sorry.
The Mishnah
Yeah.
says, "Ilamulu meroshu malchus ishis raicha and beloit." So the
Right.
Mishnah already says that the rule of law is more important.
Yeah, but then people like Voltaire will say, but what would the person do when the police doesn't watch him? For that you need religion, etc. So this is an interesting question, by the way. It's a deep, interesting question. It's true that modernity has shown, at least in some aspects of modern life, that there is a possibility of well-ordered, moral, secular society, definitely. Now the question will be, on the other side, again, will be, would it be well-ordered under pressures? Doesn't it need to be grounded in something transcendent in order to sustain those type of pressures? That's a powerful question.
I think his argument about 200 years, but we can argue that we have more than 200 years that religion did bring order. So it's not such a big argument that 200 years, because we see a lot of
You're never going to see
faults
an
also.
experiment. You're never going to see an experiment. It's impossible to prove from real
Well,
life.
let's say the following. Secularism as a collective experiment is very short
Exactly.
in human life.
There's always going
very
to be
short.
other reasons for
But
philosophizing.
Locke, for example, who's he's himself a religious person to a certain degree, but he thought that the incapacity for oath taking makes secularism a problem.
The opposite, because there's a threat of perjury versus imagined threat that they say should be an and there was no Messiah here.
Okay.
Yair Lubabaum claims that the Rambam is is a set of chukim, and it's like an order, and it doesn't cater to the individual needs. It's like a general
Of course,
order,
yeah.
versus the Rambam is Mahalach, it's the Tzon Hashem, which takes in every every individual needs. This is the
We're gonna go to discuss this issue, right? Look, Aristotle says Why is there a need? What's the political, what's the source of human problem? And why there is a need for well-ordered law? Humans are dependent on cooperation more than any other species. That's one thing. They're dependent upon cooperation. And on the other thing, the variety among them is huge, unlike any other species. Right? It's a feature of the human condition. And therefore they need law and structure and order, etc., etc. But we will get to the question of Alder Harov,
Yeah, but
etc.
we don't need that it should cater to the yochid.
Of course.
So religion fills the yochid. If you have a set of laws, the religion fulfills the individual need.
Right.
Whereas
that's a good question of how does it work within Tamei Mitzvot and other things, etc., etc. But basically, what's happening before us is the following. What the philosopher says, all this premise, you're working from a premise that you want to find the true religion, right? That was your quest. He says, no, we have a completely different view of one. You can choose any religion as long as you have one, right? From our perspective. It's a good thing for community, for Bnei Beitcha, for
the multitudes.
for the kahal, for etc. For yourself as you grow in terms of training your dispositions and other things, etc. All this stuff that you're looking for is completely empty.
It's a useful tool.
Exactly, it's an extremely useful tool of organizing society, and some people will say, and you don't need more than that. But from his perspective, that's his perspective, right?
But by the way, I just want to say one thing. It's a useful tool, and you say that אל תזלזל בזה.
חס
לא,
ושלום.
אוקיי. אני חושב שזה...
חס ושלום, חס ושלום.
לא, זה כאילו...
Of course not.
I want to say one thing. That's a very deep conservative element. The philosophers are very conservative in the following sense. They know that humans are capable of great anarchy, and that structures and law and habits and discipline and norms are immensely important. And also, they know very well, and that connects us to our that connects us to our prior discussion. They know very well that there is no genuine human flourishing in conditions of anarchy. There is no capacity of genuine, for the philosopher, or not the philosopher as an individual. For if you want to look at society, you say, is this a good society? You have to ask yourself, is it well ordered enough to create the space, right? מותר האדם מן הבהמה המותר. What's more, if you want to do a mashal, right? It's when you overcome the all-consuming need of maintenance. If your life is life pursuing maintenance all the time, you don't have the space for genuine human flourishing. And they deeply understand that, right? For the Rambam, that's Yemot HaMashiach, literally. It's the times where you achieve political stability that allows for human flourishing.
Non-stop.
And that's something. This is why saying that it's a pragmatic, useful tool is by no means actually zilzul or the other way around. They're going to be very careful in maintaining it, in deepening it, in pursuing it. They're going to be very careful in and also having deep respect for it, because they understand how it answers deep human needs and also their own condition. of human flourishing depends on that reality, right? Gadol HaShalom in that respect. You cannot achieve, when every second might be an azakah, chas v'shalom, and you think all the time about your...
In Kemach and Torah, that's...
Of course, and you might say that's deeply halachic as well. But you understand, you're completely right. This is by no means putting it down. Okay.
But you have to promote it like it's the
Of
ultimate
course.
truth.
Yes. You have to.
No, you
Because according to philosopher, it's not the end.
no, it's something very essential.
that they'll all be human beings. Will need it.
It's part of the human
Part of human
condition,
condition.
and it's essential, and that it will allow human
I
growth.
think it's very important to stress this because this is a lot of people think like, one's going to get a time, it would never get a time that we could replace it.
As long as we need cooperation,
Exactly.
as long as we are very different
Part
from
of
one
the human
another,
condition. That's it.
as long as we are whom we are embodied, we're gonna need that structure, this order, the capacity to, by the way, all society based on fulfilling promises. Right? Nietzsche says it took civilization hundreds of years to develop an animal that can make a promise. Meaning, what does it mean, cooperation? That now you give me something and I promise you that in a month
I'm going
to return something else. Without that, we're going to be like a herd of animals.
Mishapura.
That's very deep. But that needs discipline and law and predictability
Enforceability.
and property structures and many other things. Yes. Okay.
Hashem said that there's no chiyuv to the Torah, because what's our commitment worth? If there's no Torah, it needs to start with that.
Nice.
A commitment is worth.
But that doesn't explain all rules, like Hilchos Timot B'Tahara doesn't fall into
Okay.
any of that
Of course.
category, and probably
Of course,
like,
now you would say, now you would say.
It's the mash.
Why Hilchos Timot is very
Yeah. Now you would say that there are different practices. They're not have to be directly connected to Ben Adam Lechavero. It has to do with control of the passions through food restrictions, in kashrut, etc. So you can have it can take different forms, but it's not strictly Ben Adam Lechavero, not at all, or what we think Ben Adam Lechavero. And that includes, Tumah v'Tahara, separating yourself from the world of the dead, separating yourself from certain states of decay. They can give explanations that make sense of that. And Rambam will add to it in his Tamei Mitzvot, removing yourself from false opinions, but that will, etc. Okay. So we have done. It's fascinating, by the way, one very interesting thing about this is a moment in the Kuzari, apropos a book of conversation, where he gives a very short but very fair and powerful description of the particular philosophical outlook.
Yep.
You would say, okay, as a polemicist, you didn't caricature your opponent and then gain point.
We didn't yet see the Chaver.
No, you
Maybe the
actually,
character is the Chaver.
you actually, that's a powerful
It
representation,
is.
right? You say, okay, by the way, it's not all philosophers, it's not all, there are different practices of, by the way, Stoicism, very different from this.
Do you say a word about it?
Well, the Stoics think that the tragedy of human life is attachment to things you don't control. You become attached to things that are not under your control, and you become manic depressive. let's say you become a devoted fan of a certain baseball team, and your life becomes manic depressive. They win, they lose, they this, they that. You become a devoted citizen of a country, a patriot. And well, they win a war, they lose a war, they lost here, they win this. Your life becomes like a
roller
yeah, it's a torture. What you need to train yourself is to detach yourself from things you don't have control. And the only thing you have control is the quality of your own action in the world. That's the thing you have to be attached to.
But why is it so different than detaching that we spoke
No,
before?
because it's not about wisdom and attaching
No, not
yourself
wisdom,
to
but
eternal
let's say you
truth.
said about nirvana, like
No,
It's a
nirvana is
title.
passive.
passive.
It's a good answer.
No, it's not. Nirvana is passive.
Stoicism is a
It's you ask yourself. You read texts like, let's take great like Marcus Aurelius Meditations, or Cicero's or Cicero's of Seneca about anger, about friendship, about property, etc. It is midat ha'ishtavut, but not by way of detaching yourself. No, because you morally completely connected to the capacity of your action, your agency in the world, what you control, which is the quality of your action. Now, some people will say, you know, the ultimate, what is love? Love is things that it's the umbilical cord that attaches to the world, right? To this person, to the love of a child. Now, for the Stoic, this is a devastating attachment, because what happens to your child you don't control. And then you have to learn. Some people will say, again, there was Epictetus said something that I dislike. I don't like Stoicism, but I mean, I see its power, but I think there's some deep deficiencies. He says, there is nothing of value to me if I can lose it. But I think actually there are many, many things that are of value to you. And they are valued to you in some ways because you can lose them. But it's very different than saying, אני מתאחד במושכלות, you know. No. It's another form of detachment.
למה זה לא ניסוח אחר?
No, because the center of your gravity
selfishness.
is not
It's
attaching
individualism.
yourself to eternal truth, abstract eternal truth.
It's the ultimate
But
individualism.
attaching yourself to the quality of your actions in the world. You have agency of action.
But how do you get to know which things are really in control? Certain person that gets to that state has a lot of things that every philosopher also has.
Of course,
So I'm
you have
trying
to have
say,
wisdom.
Isn't it only a difference
No.
in language?
No.
In the end, both get to very close to the
No,
same
Aristotle
place.
and the Stoics are.
I understand. I'm asking why.
No,
Is it
so
only a
I'll
language
explain
thing?
to you. No, I'll explain to you.
It's about that. Sure.
I'll explain to you. Clearly, you have to have a lot of wisdom in understanding what is it in your head and what is it not. And this is why a Stoic has to be a wise person. Right? And also, there is one thing you never control to a certain degree, which is the moment of your death. And you have to detach yourself from the urge of life that consumes you, you know, that just another year, another month, etc. This is why the ultimate test of a Stoic is indifference to his death. And there are descriptions of great Stoic sages that achieved it. But it's not predicated on attaching yourself. This place of attachment is completely different. It's not predicated on attaching yourself to ultimate general truths. You attach yourself to your ethical actions in the world. Right? And that's a whole, what, you know, by the way, Stoicism had a lot of influence on Tnuat HaMusar, etc.
What?
You know, Midat HaIshtavut, what they call the equanimity, right? But that's a different, there is a very good book. There are a few books about different Greek schools of the good life. The Aristotelians, the Stoics, the Epicureans. The Epicureans had a completely different approach. It has to do with the capacity to pleasure here and now, in the here and now pleasure, and other things. There's a good book by Cooper, who's a very good scholar of Greek philosophy, but I forgot the title. I'm going to recommend it soon. I'm in the machines you're going to find it. There's a very good book by Pierre Hadot called Philosophy as a Way of Life. I mentioned it last
כבר
time.
המלצת בשיר הראשון, לפני
Okay,
3 שנים.
great, good.
כולם כבר קראו את זה.
Really wonderful. It's a very nice book. But in any event, what he describes, by the way, is a particular trend. It's kind of the Aristotelian version of the good life as it perceived through the Kud Basechel Cohen, etc., etc. Okay. Now is a okay, I want to say no because they are
No problem.
they're connected to the next thing.
בסדר.
Now Kuzari says, רואה אני דבריך נכוחים, I see the clarity of your thing, אבל אינם נאותים למה שאני מבקש. They don't answer my question. שהרי יודע אני כי נפשי זכה, וכל רצוני להפיק רצון מהאלוה, ובכל זאת הלא הוגד לי כי מעשה אינו ראוי. אם כי כוונתי רצונה. יש אפוא בלא ספק מעשה הרצוי מצד עצמו, לא מצד כוונת עושר. And then he says,
But how could it be? He was a pagan.
okay, he says, I got a dream. No, the question is this a real answer to the philosopher?
Yeah.
I have a dream. I got a dream. Okay. I had so many dreams. I dream, so many shtuyot. Divrei shav, chaloimes. That's the answer? I mean, what's going on here? It's a serious question, right? You say, well, he confronts the philosopher and says, I'm sorry. I was told in my dream that, yes, okay, חלומות שווא ידברו, yeah, fine. That's what you come with me with that. And then he says, and then he follows, we're going to come back to it. כי אם לא כן, and then he says, if it's not the case that there is a true way, מה לנוצרים ולמוסלמים, אשר חלקו ביניהם את העולם המיושב, נלחמים זה בזה. אם כי כל אחד מהם עבד את האלוה מתוך כוונה זכה ונהג פרישות וצריך להתפלל. ויצא למערכה במגלה להרוג את חברו באמינו, כי יש בזה צדקות גדולה והתקרבות אל האלוה. ובהילחם זה בזה מאמין כל אחד מהם כי במותו יזכה לגן עדן, והלא הצדקת שניהם גם יחד נמנעת אצל השכל. He says, but religions care about the truth. How do we know about caring about the truth? They butcher one another for the true religion. Okay, we have to, we're
Who
getting,
cares what religious care, but
yeah, you say actually that might be another proof, another proof to the kind of nonsensical truth claims about religion. If they were a little bit more menschlichkeit, they would say, okay, that's our way, that's your way, we have
Yeah.
different ways of organizing community.
highly.
As long as we produce menschlichkeit, that's fine.
Why is it that way? What in religion makes it that way more than in Chokhmah?
Well,
Why does it become more fanatic?
More than where?
Yeah.
More than where?
More than
because,
philosophy?
yeah, that's an interesting question.
don't know.
What's drive religions to truth claims that engage them, not only a truth claim, but also engage them in religious war?
But not even philosophy, it's not even religion. This belief that there is more than one truth, yeah, it's even less than understanding, even less accepted. Bizayon of Yadut is less in the big, the brand of Mendelssohn, yeah, what did they say? What's the Bizayon? That they say, even saying Adam Naor, there's only one truth. It's not even a religious thing. The thing that we could today say there's a few, there's more than one truth. It's more a modern thing.
Okay, now what we have to do, we have a lot of work to do here. And you say, okay, the presentation of philosopher was very powerful. No, you might accept it, not accept it, etc.
Intuition.
The answer seems schwach. And now we come to something very important to us, which is the role, and we're going to end soon. We'll end with it because that will open up our next show. I'm not. I don't think I can follow these ideas in this. It's this that you ground religious certainty in religious experience. So, well, I had a particular experience of a direct address to me by God. There is God took interest in me and in my actions. And that's irrefutable. Say, whatever your arguments here, the founding moment of religious life is driven by this direct, irrefutable experience. It repeats itself. You would say, for example, well, I see a painting. You can describe all the chemical features of the painting. You can give me a whole theory of colors and vision, but you wouldn't explain to me through that scientific reduction my actual aesthetic experience of the painting. It's irreducible.
The writing.
Right? It's irreducible. Whatever science
What
can
about
say.
feeling?
It's now what the work we're going to have to do is what is exactly the argument from religious experience. It says, look, I'm sorry.
Not my feeling.
Your whole edifice stands for its feeling might be a way of putting it. Maybe we have to expand the concept. Your whole edifice doesn't echo, doesn't answer.
Doesn't feel right with me.
Right. That's I have gone through
Experience.
a direct experience, right? That is undeniable for me.
First, could you please be magdir? What does it mean, religious experience?
Okay.
How are you gonna?
Okay, now we're going to have to do a lot of work to figure out what does it mean by that. What is the? By the way, here it's a shift in it's a great shift in the history of Jewish thought, this moment. But then it will develop through Rihal's thing. Because if you read Saadia Gaon, it says, well, if you want to, what does philosophy adds to faith? It anchors it in knowledge. If you know it, if you've proven it, it's unshakable. Right? This is you would say, this is the advantage of idea over emunah. Just know it. You have proven it. But this is a completely different foundation. Right? I've seen it. Okay. The work we're going to have to do, and this will take us a lot because it's essential to Halevi's contribution. I mean, here is, in one way, the heart of his contribution. And we're going to have to, for that, I also photocopy some of his poetry because you see it in his poetry as well. He was clearly a giant of a poet. So keep these poems with you because we're going to go through them. And another question then we're going to have to ask, but this is an issue we'll have to struggle, if the personal religious experience is the founding moment of religious certainty, you say, well, there is that experience of a direct encounter with God, who calls me, right? Who calls me. And then you say, how do you move from this personal experience to an organized religion? It's, by the way, a problem Rial will have to struggle. One of the I would say, his answer, if there is an answer here, raises a completely different question, which is, what's the difference between religious, we're going to have to investigate this category, but one difference between religious experience and another experience is the following. If I say to you, well, I had a visual experience, it means that under the same conditions, you're going to see what I saw, right? I say to you, well, you know, how do you know that that happened? I saw it. What I mean by that, if you would have been a spectator under the same conditions of light, etc., you would have seen the same thing. That's a level of certainty. But that's not true about religious experience. Right? Wittgenstein said, an interesting comment, as it says, when God speaks to someone, nobody can eavesdrop. It's not like it.
Called the Mumudako. Even by
yeah, I actually can. No, it's
the Rambam says even by Baksina, it was called the Mumudako.
Right. Now, what I want to say is, well, then how do you move exactly from, you might say, highly personal moment of certainty, unshakable certainty, to organized religion? Right? But that's a question we're going to have. So we have a lot of work to do. One is to work through.
Who says that Yadut Mushal has a Chavaya Datit?
We have a lot of questions to do. We have to understand. But here's a moment of you ask yourself, okay, what is Rihal doing? What is Rihal doing in his work? What is he adding? Where is he going? Here's an interesting moment, but we're going to have to pursue it in depth, and then
saying this is really what the Melech HaKuzari is answering.
Yeah, the Melech HaKuzari says, I'm sorry, my starting point. My starting point is completely different, and it's unshakable.
Yeah, but I'm curious. Do you see it in any words of the Rida Levi? It doesn't.
He said, "Allo gadli k'masi eno ratziv."
Godly.
I was told.
I was called.
Exactly. I was called. Okay. Okay, we did some work today. And this is a shift, a great shift in the book, a great moment in the book. We'll have to explore it. We'll have to see. We're going to have to do some work in his poetry, but also different sections in the book, especially in Chelek Revi. We're going to look at them next time. But okay.
Thank you so much.
בסדר.
I think he's trying to make the point.